Welcome everyone to the 12th talk in our International Philosophy Talk series held by the Department of Philosophy at Marmara University here in Istanbul. I'd like to start by wishing everyone a happy, healthy, a fruitful and a productive term. And to that end, we are honored to have Professor Mehmet Elgin with us today from Muğla Sıtkı Koçman University. Mehmet Elgin is a full professor at Muğla Sıtkı Koçman University in the Department of Philosophy. He received his PhD degree in philosophy from the University of Wisconsin at Madison in the States in 2002. He was a teaching assistant there between the years of 1998 and 2002. Later, he came back to Turkey and has been at the Department of Philosophy at Muğla Sıtkı Koçman University since 2004, holding the position of full professorship since 2011. During 2007 and 2008, Professor Elgin was also a visiting fellow at Leibniz Hanover University at the Center for Philosophy and Ethics of Science in Germany, and then at the University of Pittsburgh at the Center for Philosophy of Science. In 2013 and 14, he was an honorary visiting scholar in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And recently, in the past year, he was also a Fulbright scholar at Northeastern University in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies. Mehmet Elgin specializes in philosophy of science and in philosophy of biology. He has published papers in various national and international philosophy journals about biological laws, mathematical models and explanation in evolutionary biology, reductionism in biology, Kuhn's incommensurability thesis, and evolutionary psychology. Today's talk is entitled Multiple Realizations and Two Phases of Laws in Biology. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mehmet Elgin. The floor is yours, Hocam.
Thank you for the introduction. And thank you also for inviting me to give this talk.
We thank you for accepting it. Thank you.
Well, I have been working on these issues in the last 20 years since my PhD thesis. And last year, when I was Fulbright scholar at Northeastern, I thought that I had find a new argument to explain why theoretical evolutionary biologists formulate a priori laws rather than empirical laws that you will expect from empirical scientists to do. And okay, why is this issue important at all? Because there are people who think that theoretical evolutionary biologists have a choice to formulate these laws as empirical rather than a priori. And today, I will try to convince you that this is not true. And you will expect that scientists do not arbitrarily formulate laws. So there are gotta be reasons for them to formulate these laws in a certain way. So here is what Karl Popper says about these a priori laws. This is a quote from his Objective Knowledge published in 1972. What I regard as Darwin's central idea, that is his attempt to explain genetic changes which led to better adaptation in the sense of better chances for survival for the individual animal or plant to survive, has recently suffered an eclipse. This is due very largely to fashionable pursuit of mathematical exactness and to the attempt to define survival value statistically in terms of actual survival of a gene or some other genetic unit in a population. So Popper thinks that it's actually a bad thing. In the first place, it's actually a bad thing to formulate mathematical, a priori mathematical laws for an empirical science. So it is bad for evolutionary theory as well. That is why he thinks this is a problem. And his explanation as to why theoretical evolutionary biologists formulate a priori laws rather than empirical laws is that because they like this fashion to pursue mathematical exactness. So I think this is a really bad explanation. And I will try to convince you that it is not true. There are contemporary philosophers of biologists who agree, at least in this regard, with Popper. They disagree about other things, but with respect to this issue, they seem to agree with Popper. So in contemporary philosophy of biology, the debates about the a priori mathematical models in evolutionary theory has focused on whether they can provide causal explanations and whether selection can be considered as a force, like gravitational force in Newtonian mechanics. And Sober defends the view that evolutionary theory is a theory of forces, just like the Newtonian theory. And he also thinks that natural selection does provide causal explanations. Matten and Area has published paper criticizing Sober's view. So they are like Popper. They think that natural selection is not a force, and therefore evolutionary theory should not be considered as theory of forces. Lang and Rosenberg attacks another, the second claim of Sober, that natural selection can provide causal explanations. And these, in that they agree with Popper, because Popper thought that evolutionary theory should not be considered as a theory of forces. And he also thought that a priori formulations of principle of natural selection should be replaced with empirical versions, since a priori formulations cannot be causally explanatory. Okay, as I said, I will try to convince you that you're wrong, but I will not try to develop an argument that shows that natural selection can provide causal explanations. Rather, what I will do is to explain why theoretical evolutionary biologists formulate a priori laws rather than empirical laws. And then I will try to show that those a priori laws actually serves better purpose in evolutionary studies than the empirical version that Popper thinks will work better. All right, so the main question of the talk is why theoretical evolutionary biologists formulate principle of natural selection in a way that it turns out to be a priori, whereas in other branches of biology, such as in biochemistry, generalizations about the domain are formulated as empirical claims. And my thesis will be, my explanation will be, a priori formulations of natural selection is in a way forced upon the modeler because the central property in natural selection is fitness, and fitness is multiply realized. But the properties involved in empirical generalizations in say, biochemistry are not multiply realized. So that will be my thesis. So the main idea is that theoretical evolutionary biologists formulate a priori laws because they have to. because of the nature of the phenomena they are trying to model. Now, since multiple realization plays central role in my argument, I have to first say something about that and its history. This is a quote from Polger and Shapiro's book, published in 2016. And their main goal in the book is to clarify what it means for a property to be multiply realized, because they think that the early ideas are quite confused. So the first formulation is attributed to Putnam, and Putnam, Hilary Putnam and Jerry Fodor were the two pioneers of this idea of multiple realization. And they used the idea to argue that spatial sciences, that is sciences other than physics and chemistry, such as biology, psychology, economics, are genuine sciences, and because they have empirical laws that are not reducible to physics. So here is a starting point. Putnam's definition: multiple realization occurs if and only if two systems are psychologically the same and neurophysiologically different. As you can observe, this definition makes multiple realization thesis only about psychological properties, but the thesis can be generalized to all higher level properties. For example, we can replace psychology with biology and neurophysiologically with biochemically, and the thesis becomes a thesis about biology as well. And you can replace other things from economics, sociology, so you will get the same results. So this thesis can be generalized. All right, well, what is the significance of this idea with respect to whether spatial sciences are genuine sciences, whether they provide explanations, a unique kind of explanations that are not reducible to basic sciences such as physics? Fodor, I think, was the first to formulate this idea, and this actually, the figure is due to Fodor's paper. So at the higher level, we have this generalization such as all F's are G's. This is a function generalization about the functions in say psychology. And if F and G's are multiply realized, and this means different and distinct physical kinds are responsible for making F and G's possible. If this is true, and those P's in the lower level have no common properties, then we will have a generalization at the higher level, which is not reducible to lower level, because there won't be any single physical law that will connect P's to P primes. So this is the main idea. But we have to be careful here. Neither Putnam nor Fodor are dualist. So they think that in each case, F supervenes on some physical property. But what they supervene on are distinct. And in that sense, there is no single law in the lower level. So we have, and this is a nice idea. If this is true, even if we have final physics, these spatial sciences will be there because their laws are not going to be reducible to physical laws. And we also avoid dualism as well. So we can call this non-reductionist materialism. But from the beginning, there were always philosophers who were quite skeptical about this idea. And Jae Gwang Kim is, I guess, the most famous and known figure in that attempt. This is quote from his paper. He says, if a psychological property such as pain is nomically equivalent to N, the property claimed to be wildly disjunctive and obviously non-nomic, why isn't pain itself equally heterogeneous and non-nomic as a kind? So he's claiming if the realizers, that is the physical kinds that the functional kind supervene on, if they are distinct, then the functional kinds can also be distinct, or they must also be distinct, because there will be, otherwise it will be kind of mysterious how all these distinct physical kinds manage to realize the same functional kind. So he's questioning the sameness of the functional kind given the different physical realizers. And Millikan, she's more important for my talk. She is also skeptical in the same way. She says, suppose, for example, that psychological properties typically have complex functional definitions, best stated in complicated Ramsey sentences, making explicit their causal relations to other psychological properties. Then the objects having these properties will each have to fall under a great many empirical laws, basic and derived, and there might be a discipline that traces out what all these laws were. But such a science will be a priori, not empirical. And that's what I will argue today. That is the reason why natural selection turns out to be a priori. But of course, when Millikan says this, she is actually giving a kind of a reductio argument that if we accept this multiple realization thesis, then we won't have empirical science, but a priori science. And since except logic and mathematics, sciences has to be empirical, that's really not going to work. So this is kind of reductio argument that Millikan provides, but I will argue it's not correct. And another figure, philosopher who's critical of this idea is Papineau, David Papineau. He says analytic functionalism may explain how definitional truths can be variably realized, but that's a different matter. Genuine laws can be expressed by synthetic statements with the antecedent definitionally independent of the consequent, as opposed to the analytic truths that result when S1 is defined as a precursor of S2. Now, the common theme in these early reactions to multiple realizability idea is that to claim that diverse lower level kinds, physical kinds, realize the same higher level kind, that is functional kind, is implausible, because if these lower level kinds have no common property relevant to the realization of the same higher level kind, it is mysterious how those diverse kinds in the lower level science manage to do the job of realizing the same single kind in the higher level science. Thus, existence of higher level empirical laws. So if spatial sciences to be autonomous require the existence of empirical laws, those laws will be possible only if there were to be a corresponding lower level law. If there were no corresponding lower level law, then empirical laws in the higher level are not possible. But there is another paper who Bob Bederman reacts to those criticisms And he says, this is a quote from his paper. Suppose that physics tells us that physical parameters, alpha and gamma, are the only relevant physical parameters for the pain universality class. That is that NH, NR, and NM have these features in common when certain generalizations or regularities about pain are the manifest behaviors of interest observed in each of humans, reptiles, and Martians. It might be reasonable to associate the causal powers of the mental property pain with physical features alpha and gamma. In this way, despite the wild heterogeneity of the realizers, there will be no reason to think that pain causal powers will likewise be wildly heterogeneous. Okay, I think there is a response to this objection. If it is possible to associate the causal powers of pain with the causal powers common to its realizers, then it seems we don't have a case of diverse physical kinds realizing the same higher level kind. I'll just go back this picture. And now what Bederman says, P's in the lower level here have some physical property in common. And so are P primes here. But then in the lower level, we will have a single law. That's the problem with his suggestion. So we have in this case, a single physical kind realizes the same kind in the higher level science. And Polger and Shapiro provides more refined accounts of multiple realizations. They specify clear conditions to apply this idea to given cases. And their account does not allow the cases like Bederman consider to be a case of multiple realization. So here is their revised account. I call this revised multiple realization thesis, RMRT. The idea is not any variation will be sufficient for lower level kind to realize higher level functional kind. So they first give the definition: multiple realization occurs if and only if two or more systems perform relevantly the same function in relevantly different ways. And then they clarify this idea by proposing 4 conditions. So lower level kinds, physical or chemical kinds, multiply realize a functional kind F if and only if P's are of the same kind in model or taxonomic system S1. S1 here is the higher level science. P's are of different kinds in model or taxonomic system S2. So S2 here is the lower level science. The factors that lead P's to be differently classified by the lower level science must be among those that lead them to be commonly classified by the higher level science. And 4, the relevant S2 variation between P's must be distinct from the S1 intrakind variation between P's. So now what I will do, since we have this refined account and we have better understanding of multiple realization, I will use this definition, I will apply this definition to the case of fitness. And I will argue that fitness in principle of nature selection satisfy all these 4 conditions. Okay, what is fitness? This is a quote from Sober. Trait X is fitter than trait Y if and only if X has a higher probability of survival and or a greater expectation of reproductive success than Y. And I will also give a clear formulation of principle of natural selection that I will be working with. This formulation is due to Sober 2011, but it's a dynamical version of Sober's. Sober's formulation is not dynamical. So if at time t0, A is fitter than B in a population in which no other evolutionary forces are at work, and the traits are perfectly heritable, and the frequency of A is P and the frequency of B is Q, then at time t1, relative to Q, P will, in expectation, increase. So the idea is this: since fitness is multiply realized, this formulation of principle of natural selection turns out to be a priori, and it has to be a priori, given the fact that fitness is multiply realized. Okay, does fitness satisfy all the conditions? That is fitness really multiply realized property in this revised sense of multiple realization thesis? I think it is. Well, let's go like item by item and ask first whether the first condition in Polger's and Shapiro's definition is satisfied. Fitness satisfies the first condition because despite all diversity among P's that realize it, P's are all classified as the same kind in taxonomic system S1, that is in theoretical evolutionary biology, namely fitness kind in the general models of principle of natural selection. This general model issue is really important for my thesis. I will clarify what general and local model means in a few minutes. These same properties are classified as diverse kinds in many models of taxonomic system S2, namely in ecology, physiology, or biochemistry. So fitness supervenes on the features of the environment, features of the organism, and the interaction among them. And these are physiological, biochemical, and ecological properties. So biologists look at them when they assign fitness value to traits. Physiological, biochemical, or ecophysiological factors that lead these properties to be classified as different kinds in physiology, biochemistry, or ecophysiology are among the factors that lead them to be classified as the same kind in evolutionary biology, since fitness measures depend on them. Hence, the third condition is satisfied. And with respect to the fourth condition, the relevant variation among physiological, biochemical, or ecophysiological factors are indeed distinct from the variation occurring among fitness measures. So that too is satisfied. So I conclude that fitness is a multiply realized property in this revised sense of multiple realization account. Here is, I mean, of course, fitness measures always supervene on these physical features. And you may think that because of that, fitness in the general models can be reduced to these physical properties or biochemical properties. Okay, what is true is that although relevant physiological, biochemical, or ecophysiological factors may lead to the same fitness measures in a given environment for a specific biological population, there are no universally shared relevant physiological, biochemical, or ecophysiological factors that can lead to the same fitness measures for all populations. So it is because of this feature of fitness that natural selection turns out to be a priori. The principle of natural selection turns out to be a priori. Since in the case of principle of natural selection, physiological, biochemical, or ecophysiological details are not relevant. And therefore, when we relate fitness values to trait frequencies, what we get is an a priori law. There is a possible objection to this view, and Marcel Weber has this paper in which he argues that since fitness measures can be related to these physiological biochemical properties, then we may actually have type level reductions. He writes, fitness differences between certain phenotypic variants are explainable in terms of physiology, biochemistry, or ecophysiology. I have argued that some of these explanations are not merely case by case, but have greater scope. In many optimality models, or for instance, fitness is shown to be a function of energy efficiency of certain processes or behaviors. Thus, a connection is established between fitness and a physical quantity, or between a biological concept and a physical concept. So you may think that fitness is not really multiply realized property as I claim it to be, and it's more like the case like Bederman was considering with respect to pain. Well, I agree with everything in this code. I just disagree that the case, because of these reasons, fitness in the general models or in the principle of natural selection is actually is not multiply realized property, because to the extent that fitness values are explainable in this way, and they are, I agree, the models will be empirical but limited in scope. What I mean by this is that if you assign fitness value to certain trait in human populations, that can be related to physiological, biochemical, or ecophysiological factors. But when we think about the principle of natural selection, we are thinking about all populations. So the question is fitness applied to all populations explainable in terms of the same biological, physiological, biochemical, or ecophysiological properties? I think it's not. So to the extent that we have general models like PNS, these fitness assignments are not universally explainable. Look, in each case, for each population, they are explainable, but not by the same physiological, biochemical, or ecophysiological factors. They are explainable by distinct kinds of physiological, biochemical, or ecophysiological factors. So Weber's claim does not apply to PNS, or does not undermine the claim that fitness in the general model is multiply realized. So this is the picture of what Weber's claim will be amount to. So this is B here bacteria, H is human, and X is some other species, and F's are fitness value assignments, and T is trait. So in each case, there will be physiological, biochemical, and ecophysiological factors that will justify the fitness value assignment in that specific population for that specific trait. But what won't be the case is that some trait in bacteria and some trait in humans, suppose the fitness value is 0.8 in each case. There won't be any physiological, biochemical, or ecophysiological factors that are common to both fitness assignments in these different species. So that's the claim. But in each case, we will have these empirical generalizations that can be reduced to lower levels, such as physiology, biochemistry, or ecophysiology. The picture is rather like this, in my opinion. So in the higher level, we have principle of natural selection. So this all F's are Q's. We can take this as the principle of natural selection. And the relationship between fitness value assignments in each population is here in the middle. But what principle of natural selection does is to unify all these different fitness value assignments in all populations. So at in the lower level, there won't be any single or set of physical properties that will explain the fitness value being, for example, 0.8 in this general model. That's the idea. There is a possible objection. So I claim it is because of this that natural selection turns out to be a priori. So here is the idea then. Evolutionary biologists, theoretical evolutionary biologists, are in a way forced to formulate principle of natural selection as an a priori claim because of the properties of the fitness. If you want to construct general models that apply to all biological populations, that claim will, in a way, necessarily turn out to be a priori, because there won't be any single or set of physical properties that we can attach this fitness value assignment in the general models. And when we relate fitness value assignments to trait frequencies in this way, the claim turns out to be a priori because it's abstracted away from all these physical details. Diaz and Lorenzano argue that one can construct a priori models similar to principle of natural selection in Newtonian mechanics. They target Sober's 2011 paper, a priori causal models of natural selection. So the idea is that if you want, as Popper, they seem to think that it's a choice whether you can formulate the generalizations as a priori or as a posteriori. So they think if Newtonian scientists wanted, they could formulate a priori models, but they don't because that's not desirable. So thus the fact that PNAS is a priori has nothing to do with fitness being multiple realized property in this revised sense of this thesis. Well, my response is that in the case of principle of natural selection, the idealization about the non-existence of other evolutionary forces is a standard way of formulating laws in science. The universal gravitational law also involves such idealization. That's known fact in philosophy of science. However, the practice of idealization that's common to both physics and evolutionary biology produces different types of laws in these sciences. Hence, this is not a result of any adjustment needed to turn the empirical statement into an a priori statement. By the way, as a logical exercise or linguistic exercise, you can turn any empirical claim to an a priori claim by adding more statements in the antecedent of a conditional. So that it's, I mean, this is logically possible. In the case of principle of natural selection, the assumption about the existence of other forces leads to the a priori formulation of principle of natural selection because the property fitness that occurs in it is multiply realized. But in the case of the universal gravitational law, it does not, because the property mass that occurs in the gravitational law is not multiply realized, not at least in this revised sense of multiple realization. So it is true that a priori models can be constructed in physics and in any other branch of science, and with respect to any statement, by the way, but their status in physics is derivative, while the principle of natural selection is not derivative of other basic laws in evolutionary biology. What I mean by then is that all the examples Diaz and Lorenzano consider involves conditionals whose antecedent involve at least one of the Newtonian laws. But that's not the case with the formulation of principle of natural selection. Okay, now what I will do is to show you that with respect to a specific empirical example, if we follow the advice of Popper and others and formulate principle of natural selection as an empirical claim, then it will not do the job required of laws in evolutionary studies that we will expect it to do, meaning like help us analyze empirical cases and explain them. So we have these two different types of formulation. One is familiar. I already mentioned this. The easiest way to turn this a priori law into an empirical claim is to de-idealize it. So I just remove the idealization about non-existence of other forces, but natural selection is the only force claim. So what we end up is this empirical version of principle of natural selection, which says that if at time t0 A is fitter than B in a population and the traits are perfectly heritable, and frequency of A is P and frequency of B is Q, then at time t1 relative to Q, P will in expectation increase. Let me tell you just in the beginning that everybody knows this empirical formulation is false, by the way. There are lots of counterexamples to it. Empirical causal counterexamples. So it's not clear to me how false claim will explain or will help us, will guide us in empirical studies in evolutionary theory. So the skeptics about the a priori laws think that something a priori cannot explain causally something empirical. That's why a priori formulation is problematic. But once we de-idealize the a priori version, we get the empirical version of principle of natural selection, which is false. So we find ourselves in this dichotomy. true but a priori, false, a posteriori but false. The example is about the clutch sizes of birds. Evolution of clutch size in bird populations puzzled evolutionary biology. And Cook et al. Examine this case. Why were they puzzled? This is a quote from their paper. Clutch size has been shown both to have significant heritability and under directional selection to increase in many populations of birds. Nevertheless, several long-term studies on wild populations have failed to find any evidence for evolution of a larger clutch size with time. Okay, let's see if empirical version of principle of nature selection or the a priori version serve us better in analyzing and explaining this situation. The first thing to notice is that the observations about clutch sizes show that empirical version of principle of nature selection is false. As I said, there are many other examples. And this only tells us heritability and the high fitness value are not enough for a trait to evolve, which is equivalent to the observation about the clutch size. So it says the same thing. So this formulation is useless in dealing with the puzzle about the clutch size. It doesn't help us solve the puzzle. But a priori version of principle of nature selection tells us that there may be other factors because there is this idealization, there are no other forces. So when we find these observations, it tells us that, and we confirm that there is heritability and also high fitness value for larger clutch size. The other remaining option is that there are other forces. That can be environmental factors. Something may interfere with the evolution of clutch size or genetic drift, and etc. In this second case, a priori version is a better methodological guide to empirical investigations in evolutionary biology. It is therefore no surprise that evolutionary biologists formulate principle of nature selection in the way they do, because this way of formulating provides a better methodology in investigating evolutionary questions. So I think Popper is wrong. First, I mean, two comes wrong. First, he's wrong that biologists have a choice to formulate this law as empirical or a priori. He's also wrong that empirical version of it will serve better purpose for evolutionary biology than the a priori version. Now I will talk about the other examples from biochemistry. I don't think all biological properties are like fitness. There are other biological properties that are not multiply realized. So to say that general models of evolutionary theory that contain fitness are a priori does not say anything about the rest of biology. Biochemistry is a science with the aim of explaining biological properties in terms of chemical properties on which these biological properties supervene. Given this, it is reasonable to look at biochemistry to find empirical laws in the higher level science that are reducible to lower level chemical laws. Okay, but in that case, the properties, biological properties, functional biological properties, are not multiply realized. Here is an example from Lesk about the protein structure and function. he writes, included in the 10,000 protein structures now known are several families within which the molecules maintain the same basic folding pattern over ranges of sequence homology from near identity down to below 20%. How is structure maintained in the face of such drastic sequence change? So you may think that since sequences show this variation from identity to near identity to less than 20% similarity, this protein function is multiply realized by distinct sequence kinds or types. Lask says the answer is that structural details are not maintained. Rather, it is function on which selection is acting. In both closely and distantly related proteins, the general response to mutation is conformational change. Variations in conformation in families of homologous proteins that retain a common function reveal how the structures accommodate changes in amino acid sequence. Residues, this is my bold and italics, residues active in function are resistant to mutation because changing them will interfere explicitly and directly with function. Okay, now the question is whether this function of proteins are multiply realized or not. And how are we going to answer this question? We are going to look at whether these four conditions in the revised account of multiple realization in Polger's and Shapiro's account satisfy in that case. So the question is, are variations among sequences of families of homologous proteins that retain a common function sufficient to claim that the function in question multiply realized by these sequences? Well, these protein families cannot be grouped as diverse kinds with respect to the function they perform, since they share common sequences that are active in function. Because what he says, changing them will interfere explicitly and directly with function. This example satisfies first two conditions in revised account of multiple realization, but it fails to satisfy the third condition. It does not satisfy the third condition because the proteins that retain a common function are not grouped as diverse kinds with respect to the causal powers relevant to performing the function in question. So this case is more like Bob Bederman's hypothetical case of alpha and gamma physical characteristics. And as a result, if we have conditional laws at the higher level, at the biological level, where the function in question is in the antecedent and its biological effect is in the consequent, then such laws can be reduced to a single lower level law due to the fact that we will have appropriate bridge laws relating lower level kinds to higher level kinds. Well, of course, this makes perfect sense. That's what biochemistry is trying to do. But this gives us a reductive model of spatial sciences. So in that case, we have the function, and P's here are the sequences. But although they show variation, there is part of the sequence that is common to all the P's. Let's call it P star. And so for the effects of that function. Since P star is grouped as a single kind in the lower level science, with respect to the function f it performs, and since P2 star is grouped as a single kind in the same science with respect to the function g it performs, we have a single law in the lower level science, namely, if P star, then P2 star. Fodor and Putnam's argument was that when a state is multiply realized, this cannot happen. Given revised account, this is still true, but as Polger and Shapiro observe, if you look at the practices of empirical sciences, their example is neuroscience, we hardly find empirical laws at the higher level that satisfy the conditions of revised account. It seems that when conditions in Polger's and Shapiro's account are satisfied, we get an a priori law. And the other way around of saying this is that when they are not satisfied, we have an empirical law, but that law won't be irreducible. It will be reducible to lower level sciences. There are possible objections to what I have said so far. There is one paper published in British Journal for the Philosophy of Science in 2020. I just recently came across that paper. Tarko looks at this same examples, not same, but he is examining hemoglobin example, but still the idea is protein function, sequence, and structure relationship. And he thinks that the example provides a case of reduction. So this is in agreement with what I have said so far with respect to protein function, structure, and sequence. But he is skeptical that Polger's and Shapiro's account of multiple realizability will be useful in explaining why there is a reduction here. So he writes, and this is what he finds problematic in their account. The problem is that these kinds can be considered both from the chemical and biological perspective. So which science gets to decide what the relevant differences are? That is something that we just need to stipulate. Remember, in Polger's and Shapiro's account, relevant differences, relevantly the same, relevantly different, these are important. And they are something introduced into multiple realization idea that weren't there in the original formulation. So he's skeptical or he's not sure how we decide this, whether something is relevant or not. The fact that the spatial sciences can have conflicting principled means and conflicting criteria for legitimate scientific kinds produces different accounts for distinguishing relevant and irrelevant differences, resulting in higher order stipulation. I think the example I just considered from Lesk gives a clear answer to this worry about interest relativeness of determining whether something relevant or not. If you remember, what he said is that although the sequences show variation from near identity to below 20% similarity, residues active in function are resistant to mutation because changing them will interfere explicitly and directly with the function. Thus, in my opinion, this shows that it is objectively established that the part of the sequence that is common is responsible for the function. Hence, realizers, sequences of proteins, do not vary with respect to the causal powers relevant to the function in question. This does not entail that those realizers do not vary in their causal powers, period. It is likely that since these realizers show great variation, they may differ in their causal powers with respect to many other things, but not with respect to the function in question. Hence, empirical research and findings will be used to decide which differences are relevant and which aren't. So what he's demanding, I think, is not reasonable, because you cannot decide a priori, by a priori reasoning, whether some property is relevant or not. You have to do empirical work and see which is relevant, which is not. And Polger and Shapiro are not offering a theory that promises to give conditions a priori that will help us decide which properties are relevant or not. And that will be really not reasonable requirement. So higher level science may guide us define the problems properly, and the result of lower level science investigation can be used to modify our views about the higher level science or higher level science properties. There is another consideration that I have to address that may be thought as undermining my argument. There are two papers came out in 2019 by Koskinen. He argues that in rewiring of minimal genomes and the construction of unnatural biochemical systems, details are quite distinct from what we may find in variations among the realizers in natural systems. And he also argues that even if evidence for actual multiple realization is scarce, as Polger and Shapiro claim, the practices of biological engineering and synthetic biology provide a reason to think that the scope and the limit of multiple realizability may be much greater than the works in the study of actual biological systems suggest. So what is the relevance? Well, these considerations may be taken to weaken my claim that the difference between principle of nature selection and the generalizations in biochemistry can be explained by revised account of multiple realization. Since I'm just focusing on the actual studies of biological system, not all possible cases. And then it may turn out that those conditions are satisfied and the generalizations are not a priori, but empirical. Here is my response. First, Koskanen's work shows that there are degrees of multiple realization. And if this is true, we can take the case of principle of nature selection as the upper limit, and the case of a sequence structure function of a protein as the lower limit. Hence, the difference between them remains. So the fact that there are gray areas does not entail that there are clear cases. But I have something more substantial to say about that sort of objection as well. It is not clear to me that properties involved in the generalizations that Koskanen considers that apply to both artificial and actual biological systems satisfy the conditions of revised account of multiple realization. Why? Well, it is possible that the function in artificial cases and the function in natural cases are only superficially similar, and their realizers should not be classified as a single kind in the higher level science. It is also possible, so that will be the Weber's, it will be like Weber's case, right? These like local models with respect to fitness. It is also possible that variations in the taxonomic system S2, variations among the realizers of both artificial and actual biological systems, reflect the intra-kind variations in the taxonomic system S1. In the second case, the fourth condition in revised account will be violated. Another possibility is that all conditions in the revised account are satisfied. So Koskanen may be right. But in that case, it is not clear that the resulting generalizations that apply to both artificial and actual biological systems will be empirical. We don't know that. In order to decide, we have to see those generalizations and whether they turn out to be a priori or a posteriori. It's not clear to me. Perhaps they will turn out to be a priori. Without much detail, we cannot say much about this. I think I'm mostly done, but I will have to give this final result. What I think, what I had said so far shows is that biology is an autonomous science and will remain so even in the final, even if physics someday achieves final true theory in physics. So here is the argument. Any given branch of science is autonomous if it contains non-reducible laws. There are two kinds of laws in biology: a priori laws in evolutionary biology and empirical laws in biochemistry and perhaps in other related fields. Empirical laws, like the ones in biochemistry, are reducible to lower level laws. So they cannot be the ones that will make biology autonomous. However, a priori laws are not reducible to physical or chemical laws. Therefore, biology derives its autonomy from evolutionary theory, and biology will remain autonomous even when we have final physical theories. This is in line with what Dobzhansky once said about evolution. He said, nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. Theodor Dobzhansky, famous biologist. So biology cannot be eliminated as a science because evolutionary theory cannot fully be reduced to physical theories. Thank you for your patience for listening to me.
Thank you, Professor Elgin, for this really dense and enlightening talk. I guess we can open the floor for questions.
You will call the people, I guess, right?
Yes.
Should I just?
Or you, I mean.
I can't see everyone.
I'm following here. I hope I can. Yes, I mean, Esra, yes, please.
Thank you for your.
You actually had your physical hand, and I was looking for that little yellow hand.
Yeah.
Mehmet Hocam, thank you for your great presentation. Firstly, as well as I understand, one of your conclusions is that biology derives its autonomy from evolutionary theory, yes, especially natural selection and especially yes, fitness. I know your conclusion, your inference doesn't exclude other possible conclusions, but I'm curious, what do you think about, for example, Ernst Mayr, who is one of the non-reductionist attitude philosophers of biology, thinks that a lot of things, not only evolutionary theory, but also some effects such as the complexity of living beings, living systems, historical aspects of evolutionary biology as a science, or chance factor, for example, opposite of determinism, or holistic thinking, holistic attitude of biology, or limitations to the mesocosmos, something like that, makes biology autonomous. I know you have studied with Elliot Sober, who is one of the prominent philosophers of biology, what do you think about, I wonder, the perspective of Ernst Mayer's suggestions about autonomy of biology compared to your conclusion? First question.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think Mayer will disagree with what I say about natural selection. So he will probably think this is one of the reasons biology is autonomous. But I understand your question, of course. I really don't know. I consciously choose the example from biochemistry because that is where you reduce biological properties to chemical or physical properties. But in between, I don't have any a priori argument, or I don't have any stance like Mayer. What will happen in the future? Maybe the other stuff, maybe scientists will manage to reduce them as well. I think empirical research will decide. So, but then I will have to say something about the principal argument Mayer is offering. Is complexity reason to think that biology is autonomous? Well, if fitness is a complex property, I think. If they satisfy these conditions, and they will turn out to be multiple realized property, right? And then the question is, just like in the last case, if we include these artificial cases as well, whether we can have empirical generalization that apply to all these systems. I really don't know.
Yes.
Science.
But I guess is all possible. Yes. To turn out to be some kind of multiple realization category.
Yeah, and developmental biologists also think that biology is not reducible because that's a complex system. And
yes.
So, and William Wimsatt, I actually gave this talk the day before yesterday at this International Philosophy of Biology Circle, and William Wimsatt was there, and he, of course, liked the final conclusion, but he said there are other these things. Just so you asked the same question. It's not coincidence. Yeah, maybe those cases are more important. I don't know.
You have studied this fitness case, yes. Firstly,
yes, I'm prepared to look at the other cases, but I don't feel comfortable when too many empirical issues involved. So I feel like it's taking me from philosophy to the territory of sciences. And Eliot is someone who said once that the point is to understand science, not to change it.
Yes. I have one more question. Maybe two more. Yeah. Okay. You say that scientists who formulated a priori laws were not at liberty to formulate empirical laws, given the nature of evolutionary biology.
Yeah.
In the history of philosophy, totally, the attitude of the majority is really something like that, naturally. How can an empirical science based on a priori propositions, a priori claims? You negated Popper's thesis that says analytical a priori propositions are not falsifiable, so they are not scientific. However, his thesis has already many problems. Yeah. Indeed, an empirical discourse based on an analytical a priori proposition seems contradictory, but an empirical science based on these a priori claims are possible. We have learned from your paper, from your presentation today. We eliminated Popper, okay, but what about Kant's contribution to synthetic a priori in terms of the foundation of evolution?
That's a good question. I always get that question when I present, when I talk about a priori biological laws in evolutionary biology.
Yeah.
They are not synthetic a priori because they have the conditional form where the antecedent entails the consequent. But Kant couldn't have possibly considered this case because he was working with classical logic. And all these logical properties that we now know about conditionals and entailment relations, they are due to Frege's work and due to work in mathematics and axiomatization. So, I mean, this is, it's not my view, but this is Friedman's view about Kant. So Kant needed intuition and also this synthetic a priori judgment because these formal systems that we now know weren't available to him. But that's a side issue, of course. I'm not addressing your question right now. The real question is, when I presented this a couple of years ago, Alex Rosenberg was among the audiences, and he asked, let's come to chase. How can some pure thought explain reality? And it's a similar question that you are asking now. I think this idea is based on wrong view of the structure of scientific theories and how those theories relates to something empirical. So there are two main approaches. One is axiomatic approaches to the structure of scientific theories, and the semantic approach to the structure of scientific theories. According to semantic approach, even physical sciences give definitions. So what people call laws are just definitions. For example, Newton's 3 laws of motion plus universal gravitational law, they define a Newtonian system. The empirical part, according to semantic approach, is this. This particular system is a Newtonian system. And you can check whether that system is Newtonian or not. And I can say the same thing about these a priori laws. And that's how, and mathematics. I think also those intuitions, including Kant, Popper, and others, it sort of depends on wrong view of mathematics, whether mathematics explain. Mathematics and logic can be quite surprising. So when we have, like when we think of a priori, we always think of these simple cases like a square has 4 sides, right? How can that be explanatory? Yeah, or all bachelors are unmarried. But there are surprising a priori statements in mathematics, and they are more complicated and explanatory. So one idea is that when I decide whether my land is a triangle, I can use the properties of triangle in mathematics to measure my land. So that's how a priori relates to something empirical. And I believe the same thing is going on with respect to natural selection and other Hardy-Weinberg law, for that matter. It's one of the basic laws in evolutionary biology. But thank you for these 2 good questions.
Thank you for your answers. Good, excellent answers. One more, if I have chance. You say that fitness is multiple realized property, but if we are not convinced, for example, we are skeptical of your claim that fitness is a multiple realizable property. If we pick up your multiple realization attribution on fitness, can your conclusion, biology derives its autonomy from evolutionary theory, remain the same?
Yes.
I mean, can another property of evolutionary theory give biology autonomy?
Sure. I mean, this is one way to, yeah. I mean, the Mayer's account, William Wimsatt account, and these developmental biologists, of course, yeah, these are all possible. I just don't know. I'm not sure whether they can provide in principle argument.
Okay.
Like, I believe I have an in principle argument. If mathematics is not reducible to physics, because of this, natural selection is not reducible to physics either, and it will remain so.
Yes.
So
exact, sure. So precise.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure if you can do the same with respect to other arguments.
Yes, other.
And the other thing I should say about this is that even if my explanation of why natural selection is a priori fails, the fact that principle of natural selection is a priori remains. Yes. It's only my explanation that will fail. So this conclusion will go through as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Erdal Hocam.
Okay, thank you, Mehmet Hocam, for this perfect presentation, but unfortunately, I'm not familiar to these technical terms, etc., contrary
Yeah.
to astrology. But I tried to catch, some arguments, but really, it is very interesting for me. Maybe following astrologer's question concerning, a priori or Kant's synthetic a priori, etc. Even after this explanation or answer to astrologer's question, still your conception of a priori is not still clear for me, because what do you mean by a priori? For instance, yes, we know Kant use different judgment, analytic, synthetic, a priori, etc. And also we see Saul Kripke, he used, for instance, contingent a priori, or a necessary a posteriori. Maybe these formulations are totally opposite to Kant's formulation. But here, please, can you clarify this concept? What do you mean by a priori? And this is the first question. And the second question, maybe after your answer, I can ask the second question, if you want.
Sure. Okay. Here is, when Kant says a priori, it just, for him, there are sources of a priori other than reason, which is understanding, right? For me, I use a priori in just the sense of proving a statement with logic. Like, a conditional for me is a priori if its antecedent entails its consequence. For example, P entails P or Q.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, if P, then P or Q is an a priori truth. It's a logical truth. And I believe that's not the case with Kant. Kant has a broader notion of a priori.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's why it is possible for Kant to have synthetic a priori.
Okay.
In my sense, you can't have synthetic a priori.
Okay. So let me complete my question. So for you, what is the characteristic, or what are the characteristics of a priori, for instance, knowledge, a priori judgment? Maybe this point make your conception clear for me.
Well, that's a really difficult question. I don't have an answer, but I don't think anyone has clear answer either. But in any case, how can a priori knowledge be possible? I don't know. I'm not an epistemologist, but
sorry, Mehmet Hocam. I mean, for instance, for you, a priori means universal, necessary, independent of, for instance, experience, physical things, material things. Do you mean this kind of things, or
no? Here is okay. I think I have a better grasp of the question now. The fact that statement is a priori, whether a statement is a priori or not, we will just have to examine its form, logical structure, right? But the way we figure that principle may originate in an empirical research. This is the case with respect to principle of natural selection, and also with respect to Hardy-Weinberg law. So when biologists were faced with an empirical problem, their problem was to come up with a useful generalization that apply all biological populations. These are all empirical. So when biologists formulated a priori version of principle of natural selection, it wasn't formulated just like doing math exam. It came out as a result of empirical research. So pure thought, I mean, you wouldn't come up with principle of natural selection unless you study biological populations. I don't know if this helps. And same with respect to Hardy-Weinberg law, right? They had to come up with some sort of idealization and the relationship between the alleles and genotypes. So this is a way of measuring whether quantitatively population goes under evolution. These are all empirical issues. But the result of these efforts forced them to formulate a law, and they looked at it, it's a priori. So you then recognize that this is a priori. And then, of course, philosophical puzzle is, how can that be? This is an empirical science, right? That's Popper's reaction. Mm-hmm. And then he said, we can formulate an empirical version. Unfortunately, empirical version doesn't do anything because it's false. And biologists already know it's false. That is why they formulated this a priori version with the idealization. And that turns out to be more useful. Now, I didn't say anything about whether the a priori version is causally explanatory. Not in this talk. I mean, Elliot and I published a paper in which we do argue that it provides causal explanation. But in this talk and the paper, I submitted this already. I wanted to remain neutral against prejudices of people who think a priori is not going to work. I just wanted to show how it can be useful in empirical research. So that's why I didn't focus on whether it's causally explanatory. That's more difficult issue. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you too. But one more question, Sinem Hocam, then I will complete my contribution. Yes, concerning the same issue, maybe yes, really. It is so, how to say, complicated. I know it is not easy to, answer this kind of question. Maybe in your mind, there are some things that lead us to rethink about this issue. For instance, again, for Kant, any science can be science if it includes, it has, for synthetic a priori proposition, etc. Right. For instance, theoretical physics, mathematics, etc. They are science because of that. But
by the way, he says chemistry is not science.
Yes, theoretical physics. Yes. Concerning your the first first argument, I mean in the on the slide, you say any given branch of science is autonomous if it contains non-reducible law, and in the sixth, biology cannot be eliminated as a science because evolutionary theory cannot fully be reduced to physical theories. So based on these two, claims, for you, can we say that, there can be an origin from which we can, take the principle based on then we can construct science, like Kant said, or just by observing the physical and the other things we can discover something, and then we can say, yes, they can be used as a principle for constructing a science.
Mm. Yeah, I understand. I mean, in part, I agree with Kant, not with synthetic a priori thing, but yeah, theories come first. I agree with Popper as well. You can't, as Kuhn says, what are you going to observe if you don't have the theory?
Mm.
So it's, you will have to have a theories. But as I said, those theories are not refined just from the beginning. Empirical research, gives you ideas how to refine the theory and come up with the mature theory. It's a process.
Mhm.
It's not like you find this theory for some reason at the moment and then use it. It's a process.
Mhm. 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 Thank
And
you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Karim Hocam?
Yes, thank you. Again, I'm one of those who, I work in very different areas, so excuse my ignorance. My question is the following. If the principle of natural selection is an a priori law, okay, does this mean that the theory of evolution is merely an instrumental theory?
Mhm.
So by that I mean, since it is not capable of giving us causal explanations, then maybe all it can do is it can help us as humans, right, to maybe make sense of events, but not necessarily get to the reality of things, of the world. So in short, my question is this: what is the status, right, on your model? What is the status of the evolutionary theory? Is it, if it doesn't explain the world, then maybe it's just a helpful tool for us to get around, and then it can very well be false, but maybe useful.
Okay. Now, of course, I think that it does explain, but there are skeptics like Alex Rosenberg and Mark Lang and like Diaz and Renzano. They think that a priori formulation won't explain. On their account, evolutionary theory does provide causal explanation. It provides it at the empirical level with all these. So if you want, we can say, on my account, we can say that there are always local empirical causal explanations in evolutionary theory. And of course, evolutionary theory does not consist of just principle of natural selection. There is also genetic drift. And so genetic drift, some people think that it explains more than natural selection does. So there are empirical claims, empirical generalizations in evolutionary theory, other than natural selection. That's one way to go about. But what is the status of principle of natural selection if it is a priori? Well, I do think it provides causal explanation. Here is the reason. If you assume a particular theory of causal explanation, as Popper, Hempel, and like most philosophers of science, and take explanations to be arguments. And of course, then causal explanations will consist of generalizations that are causal, a major premise in this argument. And then you will deduce the specific instant to be explained from those statements. Then you will think that there is a problem with principle of nature selection to be a priori, because any statement, any a priori statements will be redundant in the derivation. That is, you can get rid of it and the argument will remain valid. I'm sorry, this is a bit technical, but so the issue comes to whether your notion of explanation requires that explanations to be arguments. And if you, and this view has been criticized by Wesley Salmon and more recently by James Woodward. Then it can be, so there are two issues. One, at least on Sober's account, nature selection is a priori and yet causal. So he's going against Hume that only empirical statements can be causal. Why? Because, you know, if we go back to the formulation of nature selection in the slides, let me, okay, here's, you know, the fitness is responsible for the change in trait frequencies. That makes it a causal concept. And yet, when you formulate this, it turns out to be a priori. So it can provide a priori explanations, causal explanations. Now, Popper actually agrees. He doesn't necessarily disagree. He says it can provide only in principle causal explanations. It cannot provide actual causal explanations for specific cases. And I mean, I published this paper with Elliot, and we went further and claimed that no, it can provide actual causal explanations as well. And with the examples, like if you look at clutch size, it's part of the explanation why clutch size do not evolve. I mean, without this a priori formulation, we don't have any explanation at all.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, I mean, I
George's
understand
question,
how
but-
the a priori statements play a role in explanations that allow for, you know, a causal, let's say, explanation.
Yeah.
But that can go both ways, right? It can either make the a priori causally explanatory, or it can make the causal explanation no more a causal explanation, right? It depends which one
Yeah.
you. And someone might say it's precisely because
Sure.
there's an a priori in the argument,
Sure.
the outcome is not an explanatory, causally explanatory.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Lang and Rosenberg says. They say there is, of course, causal explanations in evolutionary biology, and principle of natural selection may provide some kind of explanation, but the actual causal explanations are always due to specific empirical claims in specific biological populations. That's the stake.
Yeah.
And we think that if it is part of this explanatory framework, why is it not? It's part of the causal explanation.
Yeah, yeah.
It can't be the whole explanation. That's true.
Yeah.
Because you need the specifics, right, for a specific population. But it is part of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. Erdal Hocam, did you have another question?
Yes, if it is possible.
Yes, sure.
Mehmet Hocam, I have a simple question to clarify something in my mind concerning your presentation. You say a priori laws are not reducible to physical or chemical laws.
Mm-hmm.
So can we say that your arguments assume dualist perspective, or, for instance, epiphenomenal says, yes, it is also, dualist perspective, but moderate dualist perspective. Without, body, we cannot have mental state.
Okay.
So if we cannot reduce a pure laws to chemical or physical laws, so can we say that there is a dualistic perspective behind your
I hope not.
argument? It means
Yeah,
without, for instance, chemical, physical laws, that can there be any pure laws?
sure. That's
So you mean?
okay. Well, we have mathematics, and of course, human mind produced that system, right? But where does it come from? I don't think it has to be dualist. It comes from human mind. It defines a system, a rule-based system, and there are a priori truths in that system. That's because they are not reducible. But do we have to assume, as Plato did, that there is another realm for mathematical objects?
Mm-hmm.
We have to postulate a world that is different. These are more difficult questions, and I wouldn't want to go in that way, at least.
Okay.
But most people think that we don't have to, at least in the contemporary philosophy of science. But there are Platonists as well.
Yes.
Okay, but that doesn't solve the issue.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, how can such a world ontologically be possible? I'm sympathetic to Plato a lot. I must say that. But if it leads to dualism, that's I don't know how to defend it.
Maybe not Descartesian dualism,
Yeah.
but
No. I
is
didn't take your question as Descartesian dualist, but more in line with Plato. Like mathematical objects have different realm, have different realm. That's how I thought of your question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, these are more difficult issues.
Yes, sure.
I wish I had more to say about that.
Okay, I have a question as well. I'm trying to get my head around these things. So I have like a kind of a few serious questions. If I understand correctly, it's mainly evolutionary theory that makes biology an autonomous science. Correct?
Well, that's at least one
way,
argument. Yeah.
And a science as being autonomous is about its laws not being reducible, right? How about a science as being autonomous in virtue of its ontology? Is it? I mean, the reason why I bring this up is I'm wondering if there was no evolutionary theory, and if there were no a priori laws in biology, and nevertheless, somehow its ontology is not reducible, the way it cuts
Okay.
reality, that would still make the science autonomous.
I guess so. If kind of emergentism is true about the levels of organization, I think that will be sufficient to claim that science at the higher level is autonomous. Yeah, I agree. And I don't have any reservations against it. I'm just using evolutionary biology as a one case to show that biology is autonomous. But maybe there are other sources. So if there are, then I will have to weaken my final argument. Like, at least one source biology derives its autonomy from is evolutionary theory. So then I will have to be more careful about that.
Okay. I'm just checking if there are any further questions. Okay, I guess not. And we are almost 2 hours in as well. Thank you, Mehmet Hocam, for this wonderful talk, very enlightening.
Well, thank you for great questions. And for some of them, I had no idea how to. And then the ontology of mathematics, it's a hard question.
So this actually has
I will
marked.
be very happy to have any clue, but I don't.
This has marked a very productive start for our term. And thank you again, and thank you for everyone who's participated and asked questions and make this talk even more fruitful. Thank you and good evening all.
Yes. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Hocam. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice to meet you all.
Same here. Same here.